Have you felt lately like, I don't know, your memory is just kind of shot? Like you're reading way less than you used to, you're struggling to come up with interesting or original ideas, and you're just dragging around this heavy, invisible sense of cognitive fatigue? Well, if so, listen, you are definitely not alone. It's a feeling so many of us are dealing with right now. It's an exhausting byproduct of our modern digital environment. But the really good news? You can absolutely get your focus back. So let's dive right into this explainer, where we're going to lay out a super concrete, step-by-step roadmap for reclaiming your brain through the incredible power of self-education.
Brain rot. I know. It sounds like some cynical piece of internet slang, right? But get this, it's actually the Oxford Dictionary's 2024 Word of the Year. And that official recognition, it really grounds this very modern, widespread anxiety we all share about endless scrolling. It proves this is a massive cultural phenomenon. We are systematically outsourcing our attention to short, trivial content that completely engages the eye, but totally bypasses the mind. And over time, honestly, without us even realizing it, that passive habit just drains our memory, our focus, and our natural creativity.
There's this quote from the modernist writer Virginia Woolf that I absolutely love. She once said, "Thinking is my fighting." Now, while she was originally talking about the existential threat of World War II, that sentiment, it applies perfectly to the invisible war for our attention happening on our screens right now. Self-education isn't just some cute hobby you pick up to pass the time on a lazy Sunday. Reclaiming your ability to deeply focus is an active, vital defense of your cognition, your literacy, and your discernment in an age ruled by algorithms. Okay, so here's our exact roadmap for this explainer. First, what is brain rot? Second, the cognitive reserve hypothesis. Third, the power of self-education. Fourth, the SCAR method. And finally, avoiding common pitfalls. We're going to move swiftly from understanding the actual science behind the problem straight into a highly actionable, concrete solution. All right, section 1. What is brain rot? The war for our attention. So, what are we actually talking about when we worry that our daily social media habits are fundamentally making us, well, dumb? While long-term, totally conclusive studies on digital consumption and permanent cognitive decline are still pretty new, we do have some incredibly disconcerting clues. Take a recent study titled Your Brain on ChatGPT. Now, it's not peer-reviewed just yet, but it found that participants who used large language models to write essays showed demonstrably less brain activity and way less neural connectivity. When you really think about what that means for your everyday life, it shows the immediate, measurable biological effects of outsourcing our deep thinking and problem-solving to an algorithm. It's wild. So it really all comes down to the stark difference between passive consumption and active engagement. You might be thinking to yourself, well, hey, I don't watch nonsense videos. I watch highly produced 3-hour video essays or really intricate crafting tutorials. But here's the catch. Even sitting back and consuming good content with real artistry, it's still fundamentally a passive act. It demands very little actual output from you, and it secretly steals your limited attention away from activities that actually require sustained, productive mental effort. Moving right along to section 2, the cognitive reserve hypothesis. Use it or lose it. To really understand brain rot, we've got to look closely at the science of brain health. And honestly, it helps to think of the brain almost exactly like a muscle. Research from Utah State University reveals this fascinating contrast in how our brains age based on how we actually treat them. A brain with high cognitive reserve, it has a massive amount of healthy cells and abundant, thick connections between them. On the flip side, a brain with low cognitive reserve means fewer healthy cells and really sparse, weak connections. To build and maintain those dense connections, you literally have to actively use the cells. So brain rot isn't, literal rot, it's cognitive neglect. Endless, easily digestible content just simply isn't giving your brain the rigorous workout it needs to keep those vital connections strong and firing. Now, if you want to know how to give your brain that exact workout, findings from the Delaware Journal of Public Health show us that engaging in mentally stimulating activities actively promotes the production of brand new neurons. It physically builds those neural connections through neuroplasticity. This directly boosts your capacity for problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity. Active learning is simply the most direct, scientifically backed antidote to cognitive neglect that we have. Which brings us to section 3, the power of self-education. Self-directed learning. The genuinely beautiful thing here is that you absolutely do not need to go back to some expensive university with rigid schedules and heavy stress to get all these cognitive benefits.
It ultimately boils down to intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. If you search the internet for why you should self-educate, you're going to be constantly bombarded with extrinsic reasons. It's a valuable soft skill, or it gives you a competitive edge in a tough labor market, or it looks great on a resume. But I highly urge you to lean entirely into intrinsic motivation. Do it simply for personal enrichment and pure joy. Just think back to when you were in middle school, totally free from the pressure of grades, and you just wanted to learn about ecology or fashion design purely because it was cool. Reclaiming your brain means granting yourself the freedom to do hard things just because they fascinate you.
All right, section 4, the SCAR method, 4 steps to self-educate. Look, reclaiming your brain is entirely within your power, and this super simple system is going to show you exactly how to structure that journey. SCAR is just an acronym for 4 highly actionable steps: select, curate, apply, and reflect. Let's walk through how each of these phases puts you firmly back in the driver's seat of your own mind. Let's start with step 1, select. Fun fact for you, did you know that roughly 50% of the English language is actually derived from Latin? Now, when you select a topic to study, your genuine interest dictates how deep you'll actually go. You might think you should learn a language like Spanish because, sure, it's practical for travel or work, but if you're a writer who is endlessly fascinated by language origins, learning classical Latin is actually a fantastic choice because your deep curiosity will keep you engaged way after the sense of obligation fades. Choose what genuinely draws your attention, even if it starts with those niche cooking or true crime videos you already stopped scrolling to watch. Step 2 is curate. To completely avoid getting overwhelmed by decision fatigue and just the sheer chaotic volume of the internet, I want you to use the rule of 3. Find exactly 1 foundational text, 1 expert to follow, and 1 active community. For our Latin example, that means buying 1 specific textbook, following 1 specific YouTube expert, and checking 1 specific subreddit. Keep it curated, keep your inputs incredibly simple, and you won't get lost in the noise of trying to find the perfect resource. Step 3 is apply. You basically got to ask yourself, can you teach this to a child? This is a brilliant test based on the famous Feynman technique, named after the Nobel laureate physicist. So after you study something highly conceptual like literary theory, philosophy, or psychology, you have to close your books and try to explain it in plain English, as simply as possible. It exposes the illusion of competence. If you find yourself heavily relying on dense jargon, well, it means you don't truly understand the material yet. You've just memorized the vocabulary. But hey, what if you're learning a practical skill like baking or pottery? Then you need to consistently ask, what am I doing and why am I doing it? True application means understanding the underlying mechanics. If you're baking a cake, it's one thing to just blindly follow a recipe and mix ingredients, but it's an entirely deeper level of cognition to understand the chemistry, like exactly why you need butter, what the protein in the egg actually does, and why the oven absolutely must be at 350 degrees instead of 400. And finally, step 4, reflect. This step is what really cements your learning and directly fights brain rot by forcing recall and synthesis. Conduct a simple weekly audit in a physical notebook, often called a commonplace book. Just take 10 minutes to write down what you had trouble explaining, what sudden insights you gained, and how new concepts unexpectedly connect to old ones you already knew. Because there's no teacher grading you here, this step forces you to evaluate yourself, which inherently develops your critical thinking and analysis skills right alongside whatever topic you're studying. Okay, last part. Section 5, avoiding common pitfalls. Obstacles to learning. As you start this self-education journey and begin rewiring your brain for focus, you are totally going to encounter a couple of very predictable psychological hurdles. You're likely going to face 2 major traps. First up, the beginner blues. This is that daunting, heavy frustration when you start learning a language or an instrument and you just want to be an expert immediately. You have to push through. The creator of our source material spent over 6 years, literally 6 long years, knitting tragically misshapen, lumpy scarves before she could comfortably handmake a third of her own wardrobe. The growing pains are real, for sure, but they are so worth it. On the flip side is shiny object syndrome. This is when you're so excited by learning that you constantly abandon projects to start new topics. The danger here is that starting over gives you that exact same quick, unearned hit of dopamine that scrolling to a new video does. If you aren't careful, learning just becomes a disguised version of endless scrolling. So how do you beat that endless algorithm mindset? Well, to satisfy your brain's natural, intense craving for novelty, don't change your topic. Change your study methods. If you're learning Greek, don't suddenly jump to Korean and then German when things get tough. Stick with Greek, but deliberately vary the input. Read a short story on Monday, do rigorous grammar drills on Wednesday, passively listen to a podcast on Friday, and maybe try speaking with someone on Sunday. You're hacking your brain by getting the fresh dopamine hit of a new activity, but you're actually doing the hard work of going deep into a single subject. Reclaiming your brain means deliberately stepping away from the feed. It means stopping the endless consumption of a prepackaged, algorithmically sorted reality and actively choosing to experience life, challenges, and knowledge directly for yourself. So I want to leave you with this one provocative question to think about as you go about your day. If you could study absolutely anything right now, what would it be?